Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith, and with me is my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Chad Wandell. How are y'all doing this evening?
Doing great. I had well, you have to listen to Patreon to hear what I did to my face on Monday.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Never had that done to me before. Patreon member and find out.
You know how Shelley likes all of her weird products. We'll just leave it at that.
Uh-oh. You didn't put one of them boob patches on your face, did you?
Mm-mm.
Oh, that's a good guess, though.
Think lower region.
Just let that one sit there for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, marinate in that for a moment.
Yes, marinate. I not only was I marinating in it, it was pounded into me. So become a Patreon member and find out.
Oh, Jesus,
Guys, it's worth the $5 to scratch that itch, right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that y'all have survived the week, and I'm glad that y'all are doing well. And Shelley, you're absolutely glowing tonight.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd notice.
But anyways, we are on to our July topics that we usually like to cover, which is aliens.
Yes.
We haven't done aliens yet this month. We usually do aliens all month long, but we had a little bit of change of plans this month, but we're getting back to it. So we're going to be talking about the Ariel School UFO Incident. Now, do either of y'all know anything about this case?
Very little.
I do know some about this case. I've watched a documentary on it about, gosh, it has to have been a year or two ago. So I'm going to need my memory refreshed on the facts and so that I can get right back up to speed. And I'm sure you found something that probably wasn't in the documentary.
This one is interesting. Now, I know we've had a lot of alien subjects on this show. This one, all the experiencers are children. There are no adults that experienced this incident. But sometimes we're not told the full story. And that's what I found more intriguing about this story. So with that, if y'all are ready, we can jump into it.
Yes.
And I will let you know what I discovered. So,
Yes, let's go.
all
I'm
right.
ready.
All right. Well, on September 16th, 1994, at the Ariel School in Rua, Zimbabwe, more than 60 children claimed they witnessed something extraordinary. What they discovered would become one of the most famous and enduring UFO cases in history. One that, more than 30 years later, still resists a simple explanation. Since that morning, the Ariel School incident has been featured in documentaries, books, news reports, podcasts, and television specials. Now, for some, it's among the strongest evidence that extraterrestrials have ever visited Earth. For others, it's an example of mass hysteria, suggestion, misidentification, or the remarkable ways memory and belief can shape an experience. But between those interpretations lies a more complicated question. How do we evaluate a story like this in the first place? Investigating a claim isn't just about collecting the evidence that supports the conclusion. It's about weighing what aligns, what conflicts, and what remains unresolved when neither side has all the answers. Now, in the early 1990s, Zimbabwe was a young nation. Having gained independence from British rule in 1980, the country was still shaping its identity under President Robert Mugabe. While later decades would bring severe economic instability, hyperinflation, and political turmoil, Zimbabwe in 1994 was experiencing a period that, by comparison, was relatively stable. Agriculture remained the backbone of the economy, tourism was growing, and many families were optimistic about the country's future, even as underlying political and economic challenges were beginning to emerge. Now, roughly 12 miles southeast of the capital city of Harare sat the growing community of Rua. What had once been a quiet farming district was gradually becoming a residential suburb, attracting families who wanted the benefits of city access without the pace of urban life. Open fields, scattered trees, and stretches of undeveloped land still surrounded much of the area, giving it a distinctly rural character despite its proximity to Zimbabwe's largest city. Now, nestled within this landscape was the Ariel School, an independent primary school that served children from kindergarten through the early middle school years. Although the campus sat amid farmland and open countryside, many of its students came from professional and farming families throughout the greater Harare region. Parents chose Ariel for its reputation, smaller class sizes, and emphasis on providing a well-rounded education in a peaceful environment. According to former students, Ariel School fostered both structure and curiosity. Christian teachings were part of everyday school life, while Bible reading and assemblies were woven into the curriculum alongside traditional academics. Learning often extended beyond the classroom walls. Students spent much of their days outdoors, where expansive playgrounds, open fields, and the surrounding landscape encouraged exploration, imagination, and independence. Former pupils have described it as a place where children were trusted to be curious, where recess meant freedom to roam, invent games, and interact with nature rather than remaining confined to paved playgrounds. And for the children who attended Ariel, September 16th began like countless school days before it. Lessons had started, and as was routine, the students were released for their mid-morning recess at around 10 a.m. Now, on this particular day, the teachers were gathered inside the school for a meeting, leaving the playground largely unsupervised except for a few staff members, including cafeteria workers. Outside, children clustered in small groups, talking, playing, and enjoying the open space. And as the children scattered across the playground during their morning break, the routine of the school day was suddenly interrupted. Several students noticed something unusual beyond the edge of the school grounds, in a rough field of tall grass, thorn bushes, and scattered trees bordering the school property. What first caught the attention of only a handful of children quickly spread to others nearby as they stopped what they were doing and looked toward the same area. The first thing many of the children remembered seeing was light. Some described brilliant flashes that seemed to appear and disappear, while others recalled bright objects moving low over the field. Several later spoke of a clicking sound that accompanied the flashing of light, almost as if the lights themselves were switching rapidly on and off. And others remembered a separate sound they associated with the object itself, a soft flute-like tone, unlike any aircraft or machine they had ever heard before. And as they continued watching, many of the children began describing more defined shapes within the lights. Several recalled seeing a disc-like object, while others described one larger craft accompanied by a number of smaller objects moving around it. Those smaller objects were remembered differently from child to child. Some believed there were only a few, while others described several moving around the larger object, with one child later comparing them to like ants circling something much larger than themselves. And although the number of objects varied across accounts, many of the children agreed that at least one appeared to descend into the bush near the edge of the field. And that's when their attention shifted from the objects themselves to what they believed had emerged nearby. Now, depending on the witness, anywhere from 1 to 4 figures were reported. Although the number varied, the descriptions shared striking similarities. The figures were generally described as short, wearing tight-fitting black clothing that several children compared to scuba suits. Their heads were said to be of oval shape with pointed chins. Their eyes were unusually large and dark and positioned lower on the face than a person's eyes normally would be. A lot of times in a lot of the interviews, you'll actually see these kids like hold their hands up like this and give almost saucer size shapes like over their eyes. And so they're talking about where your cheekbones are is where they say that the eyes actually kind of hit on these figures. So the mouths of the figures appeared as little more than narrow slits, and several children remarked that they could barely make out any ears at all. Some recalled, though, seeing long, straight black hair, while others focused almost entirely on the eyes. And it was those eyes that many witnesses remembered most vividly. Several children later described making eye contact with one of the beings and experiencing what they believed was a form of communication that occurred without spoken words. None recalled hearing voices in the traditional sense. Instead, they described thoughts or impressions that seemed to arrive instantly, as though the meaning was understood rather than spoken aloud. While not every child reported receiving such an experience, those who did described remarkably similar themes. According to those witnesses, the message centered on humanity's relationship with the earth. They spoke of impressions that people were harming the environment, that the air, water, soil, plants, and animals needed to be protected. Several also recalled a warning about humanity becoming too dependent on technology and the direction civilization was heading. Now, whether understood as words, emotions, or vivid impressions, many of the children would later describe this perceived communication as the most profound and unforgettable part of the encounter. For many of the witnesses, the images of the craft and the figures never faded. Yet decades later, when asked what stayed with them the most, it was often that silent exchange. the feeling that something had communicated with them without ever speaking a single word. Now, eventually, sorry, do I have something?
That's
Go ahead,
got to
Chad.
be a weird, excuse me, sensation to have basically somebody else's voice talking to you in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially if you're not even a little bit aware of that. And then all of a sudden you're just like, wah, 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 wah.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
And that was the thing that a lot of them said, that when the eyes locked on, it was almost as if nothing else really mattered. But they got this sensation. It wasn't just this sensation that they were connected, but that their body was connected. That this immediate, God, I can't remember the word the girl said in the
it's
documentary.
really like hive locality. I mean, like,
She basically said she could feel it all over her body whenever
Like
the
a vibrational
connection was made.
sensation?
Almost, but she didn't describe it as a vibration, but it was kind of that sense, like it went all through her body. It was like her
Yeah.
body was connected.
it's
to
like
this being.
one mind, one body. They all share the
Mhm.
same sensation. And so when they connected, you became one of them. Like,
Yeah.
literally.
So like a
one of
hive
us.
mind kind of thing?
Yeah.
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 Kinda.
That's crazy.
So this is so first of all, let me back you up just a tad.
Yeah. Go for it.
You're saying that they were seeing that suddenly. I want to know, first of all, what was the day like? Was it a sunny day? Was it a
This
cloudy
was a
day?
sunny day. This was a
So,
sunny
but
day.
and even on a sunny day in Africa on a plane, basically they are seeing lights that are flashing and moving.
Yes.
Okay, so those lights are going to have to be pretty bright to get their attention on a beautiful, sunshiny, bright day. And they're moving in a tree line.
Yes. There's so just
Okay.
beyond the playground is this kind of open field with brush, thorn bushes, tall grass, and stuff like that. That's where this thing is descending. So
Okay.
let's say you have a map. Up at the top would be the playground, center top. Then you would basically go all the way down to the bottom of the page and slightly right. That
Okay.
is where they're seeing this from the playground. Now, north, south, east, and west can't really. It's hard to
Sorry.
tell. But anyways,
I'm not Magellan. It doesn't matter to me.
it was a few good feet away. Some of these individuals said that the object itself may have been like 60 feet or so, but the beings themselves came within very close contact.
Wow.
Watching some of the documentaries, two girls standing in front of each other, showing how far apart that they were. I would guesstimate, because it's through a screen, maybe about 15 or 20 feet.
Okay.
Something like that. So they're
That's close
pretty
enough.
close to be able to see some pretty high details.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
you know what's interesting is the way that you just described them.
Mhm.
A specific alien came into my brain. And if you remember Men in Black, the Archelians, the little guy inside the head.
Yes. I was like, you're going to have to remind me. Yes, I know exactly.
The
what
way
you're
you
talking about.
described him makes me think of exactly that, but the big version.
True. Yeah. And I actually do have some drawings that I'm going to be showing here in a
Oh,
little bit
sweet.
of what these kids said that they allegedly saw.
Yeah, this alien though you're describing sounds more like the chick from The Ring with the dark hair and the dark eyes, dark big eyes, but the black scuba looking suit.
Yep.
That's a different detail.
I mean,
You know.
Now,
I
I will
have a spacesuit.
Right.
True, but I will there's and see that's the issue with some of this that we'll be talking about here in a little bit, with some of them describing it without hair, some describing with hair, and the scuba suits even come into question later on.
I was going to say, some of us don't have hair, so that's okay.
Well, eventually the morning recess came to an end. The children returned to their classrooms talking about what they believed they had seen beyond the edge of the school grounds. Some continued comparing their observations with classmates, while others tried to explain the experience to their teachers. And according to several former students, the teachers largely dismissed the conversations and encouraged the children to settle down and resume the day's lessons. Aside from the discussions happening among the students themselves, the remainder of the school day proceeded as scheduled. September 16th, 1994 was a Friday. And when school was dismissed that afternoon, the conversations continued at home. Children told parents what had happened during recess. Parents spoke with other parents whose children attended Ariel School. Neighbors called one another. And as families compared what their children had reported, it became apparent that many of them were describing very similar events. Now, throughout the weekend, the story spread well beyond the school grounds and into the surrounding community. And by the time classes resumed on Monday morning, September 19th, parents were calling the school looking for answers. Staff members who had not witnessed the event themselves were suddenly fielding questions from families trying to understand what their children had described. And what had begun as conversations among students on Friday had become a matter of concern for both parents and school administrators. And as word continued to spread, it also reached the local media. And among those who learned of the reports was Tim Leach, the BBC correspondent based in Zimbabwe. Leach visited Ariel School on September 19th, only 3 days after the incident. Now, by that point, he had spent years reporting from conflict zones and covering the realities of war. In later interviews, he reflected that speaking with the children at Ariel School presented a different kind of challenge. He said he could make sense of war because there were facts to report and events to verify. What he encountered at Ariel School was far more difficult to explain. He actually said, "I have covered several war zones, and this event at the school I can't handle," is what his actual words were. So after hearing the children describe their experience, Leach contacted local UFO researcher Cynthia Hind, believing the story warranted further investigation. So one of the first people to take a serious interest in the reports coming from Ariel School was Cynthia Hind. By 1994, Hind had spent nearly 2 decades investigating reports of unidentified aerial phenomena throughout southern Africa. Originally from South Africa, she had studied English and psychology before serving in the South African Women's Air Force during the Second World War. After later settling in what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, she helped build and manage a successful furniture manufacturing business before eventually devoting herself full-time to research and writing. And over the years, Hind established herself as one of Africa's best-known civilian UFO investigators. She's served as Zimbabwe's field investigator and later continental coordinator for Africa with the Mutual UFO Network, commonly known as MUFON, one of the world's largest civilian organizations dedicated to investigating reports of unidentified aerial phenomena. Her work had taken her across the continent to interview witnesses, document sightings, and publish detailed case investigations in journals, newsletters, and books. By the time the reports from Ariel School began circulating, she had already spent years building a reputation within the international UFO research community. On September 20th, 1994, 4 days after the incident, Hind arrived at Ariel School to begin documenting what the children had reported. Her goal was straightforward: speak with the witnesses while their memories were still fresh and preserve as much of their testimony as possible. As part of her investigation, Hind asked the children to draw what they remembered seeing that morning. Those drawings would become some of the most recognizable pieces of evidence associated with the Ariel School case. Now, taken together, they depict many of the same elements described during the children's interviews. Disc-shaped objects surrounded by bright lights, strange figures standing near the craft, and in many cases, details that individual children considered important enough to include. Several drawings depict landing gear or footpads beneath the craft, while others show what appears to be a ramp extending from the object to the ground. Features some of the children said they observed as one or more figures emerged. Although no 2 drawings are identical, many contain recurring themes that mirror the children's reported descriptions. And alongside Hind's interviews, these illustrations preserve some of the earliest visual accounts of what the students remembered experiencing and continue to be among the most frequently reproduced pieces of evidence associated with the Ariel School incident. And for Hind, Ariel School was not simply another unusual report. From the number of witnesses involved to the consistency she believed she was observing in their descriptions, she regarded it as one of the most significant cases she had ever investigated. Her work during those first few days would preserve many of the earliest accounts of the incident and would also bring the story to the attention of yet another researcher whose involvement would shape the Ariel School case for decades to come. So she gets there within 4 days and asks the kids to draw. I believe I have found one website, which I can show here in a little bit once we get to the discussion part, that they've actually compiled most of the pictures. I believe there's 73 pictures.
There's a lot
on
I've
that
seen
one
some of
website.
those, yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
ton.
Yeah. So she gets there. She starts doing what she knows to do.
As a
And-
psychologist working with children, can you draw me what you saw? Can you show me a picture? Can you put the colors on there? Yeah,
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Well, as Hind continued documenting the children's account, she became convinced that the Ariel School incident warranted attention beyond Zimbabwe. Although she had investigated reports of unidentified aerial phenomena throughout Africa for years, the combination of eyewitnesses, the children's consistency, and the circumstances surrounding the case led her to believe additional expertise was needed. And one person immediately came to mind. The year before, Hind had met Dr. John E. Mack at a UFO conference where the two had discussed their shared interest in investigating extraordinary experiences. Mack had already become well known for his work examining reports of alleged alien encounters, but unlike many researchers in the field, his background was firmly rooted in academic psychiatry. Believing his experience with interviewing witnesses, particularly children and individuals reporting extraordinary experiences, could provide valuable insight, Hind recommended Tim Leach that he contact Mack and encourage him to travel to Zimbabwe. Now, it would be nearly 2.5 months before Mack arrived at Ariel School. And by then, this story had already spread beyond Zimbabwe, attracting international attention and placing the events of September 16th under increasing public scrutiny. And when John E. Mack arrived, John don't want y'all to think it's Johnny. John E. Mack.
Mr. Mack.
Probably just shorten it to Mack.
Yeah.
But anyways, when Mack arrived in Zimbabwe in November 1994, he was already one of the most respected psychiatrists in the United States. As a graduate of Harvard Medical School, Mack had spent decades building a distinguished academic career. In 1977, he became chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, a position he would hold for the remainder of his career. That same year, he received the Pulitzer Prize for his biography, A Prince of Our Disorder, chronicling the life of T.E. Lawrence, better known to many as Lawrence of Arabia. His work had earned recognition not only within psychiatry, but throughout the broader academic community. And long before his name became associated with UFOs, Mack's research focused on some of psychiatry's most complex and deeply human questions. His clinical work centered on child psychology, adolescence development, and the psychology of religion. He became a leading voice in the study of teenage suicide and substance abuse, seeking to understand how young people experience trauma, identity, belief, and emotional distress. Throughout his career, his work consistently explored how people interpret profound experiences, and how those experiences shape the way they understand themselves and the world around them. It was that interest that gradually led him toward a very different line of research. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Mack began interviewing individuals who reported encounters they believed could not be explained through conventional means, including claims of alien abduction. Like many in the psychiatric community, he initially approached these reports expecting to find evidence of mental illness or psychological disorder. And instead, he found many of the people he interviewed appeared psychologically healthy, with no obvious signs of psychosis or delusion. Whether their experiences reflected external events, internal psychological processes, or something else entirely, Mack concluded they deserved a careful study rather than immediate dismissal. And that approach would eventually lead him to interview more than 200 individuals who reported extraordinary encounters, making him one of the most recognizable academic figures studying the phenomenon. And by the time Cynthia Hind recommended that Tim Leach contact him about the Ariel School incident, Mack had become uniquely positioned at the intersection of clinical psychiatry and the study of extraordinary human experience. When he stepped onto the grounds of Ariel School, he did so not simply as a UFO researcher, but as a Harvard psychiatrist whose career had been devoted to understanding how people experience, process, and remember the most extraordinary moments of their lives. That's a lot, but I want y'all to understand his academic.
This guy knows what he's talking about. If he starts researching something psychologically, he's going to make sure that there's nothing. Now, I know this would be traumatic, but there's nothing trauma-based for this sighting. You know, like the teachers weren't locking them in closets or something like that.
Right.
And I would assume that he's going to be bringing a more scientific research approach to what he's going to go after, rather than just, oh, look at these pictures, take some stories. There's UFOs.
It's UFOs.
I got to find my foil.
Yeah, where's your tinfoil hat, Chad?
I can go get it. I need a tinfoil hat.
Well, when Mack arrived in Zimbabwe, the Ariel School incident had already been documented by local media and by Cynthia Hind. The children had already spoken about what they believed they saw, drawings that had already been collected, and the story had begun moving beyond the school community. Mack was not the first person to investigate this case, but his involvement changed how the case would be understood by the entire wider world. I guess entire wider is not needed. Wider world. There we go. Well, at Ariel School, Mac interviewed children who said they had witnessed the event. Sitting across from them, he asked them to describe what they remembered: the objects near the edge of the school grounds, the figures they believed they had seen, and the fear, confusion, and sense of communication that many associated with the encounter. Much of what they told him echoed the central elements already reported in the days after the incident: bright objects, unusual figures, large dark eyes, and an experience the children struggled to explain in ordinary terms. The primary element that became more pronounced in Mac's interviews was the idea of this telepathic communication, with several children describing a sense that messages or warnings were conveyed directly into their minds. And what made Mac's involvement significant was not that he uncovered an entirely separate version of the events. It was that he brought the authority of Harvard psychiatry to a story many adults had already dismissed. As a clinician, he was listening not only for what the children claimed to have seen, but for how they told the story, whether they appeared frightened, coached, confused, imaginative, or sincere. His conclusion was that the children were not simply playing a prank or repeating a story they did not believe. To Mac, their accounts reflected a real experience, whatever the ultimate explanation might be. From that point forward, the case carried two forms of testimony: the children's reports of what they believed happened on the playground, and Mac's professional assessment that those children appeared to be describing something they genuinely experienced.
Very quickly, Blake.
Yes.
What is the age range? Because that little girl in the picture looks like she might be 10 or 11.
6 to 12. Oh, sorry.
6 to 12 is the age
12.
range of the reporting
Yes.
children that experience this event.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, because that
6
little
to
girl
12.
looks like she might be 10 or 11. That's why I was asking. Okay.
Yep. Well, there was another part of John Mac's story that was unfolding at the same time, one that would later become inseparable from discussions of the Ariel School case. Several months before Mac traveled to Zimbabwe, Harvard Medical School had initiated a confidential review of his work. In May 1994, the dean appointed a committee of Mac's peers to examine his clinical practices and research methods related to his work with individuals reporting extraordinary experiences. By the time Mac arrived at Ariel School in November, that review had already been ongoing for nearly 6 months. And the distinction is a very important one. Contrary, and I say this very loudly, contrary to how the story is sometimes told, Harvard was not investigating John Mac simply because he was studying reports of alien encounters. Universities routinely support research into controversial subjects. The committee's focus was instead on how Mac conducted that research. Specifically, it examined his clinical methodology, his interviewing practices, and whether his approach appropriately distinguished between documenting a patient's reported experience and endorsing that experience as objective reality.
Okay.
The review attracted considerable attention within academic circles after news of its existence became public. Some scholars questioned whether a tenured professor should be subjected to such scrutiny when there had been no allegations of scientific misconduct, ethical violations, or professional wrongdoing. Others believed the committee's concerns about methodology deserved a careful examination. The discussion quickly grew beyond John Mac himself, raising broader questions about academic freedom, scientific inquiry, and how researchers should investigate experiences that fall outside conventional scientific understanding. After approximately 14 months, Harvard concluded its review. The university reaffirmed Mac's academic freedom to pursue his research and to express his conclusions without institutional interference. He remained a member in good standing of the Harvard Medical School faculty. And although the review committee reportedly criticized aspects of his research methodology, the university imposed no disciplinary action. When Mac left Zimbabwe, he carried with him not only the testimony of the Ariel School children, but also an investigation into his own research that was still unfolding. Yes, I'm kind of jumping back and forth between ongoing investigation and it concluding, but I want y'all to know what the conclusion was going into this next portion.
So they're investigating him because they think he's just... One of the things in psychology you don't do is you don't feed into a delusion. If someone is becoming delusional, you don't feed into that. You try to reason and explain gently, could this be this or could this be this? You want to pull them out of that delusional state. So sounds like they were worried he was just rubber stamping That if somebody told me this was this, then yes, it was, and I believe you without question. With that, so tell me your experience.
That was what they were basically investigating on him. Was he doing his research job properly, or was he just feeding into the fact of, yep, that's an alien experience?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that they were
Or an
questioning whether or not he was
extraordinary
rubber
experience. Sorry.
stamping it
Yes,
as yes,
yes.
it's real, without
Correct.
actually digging into the person, asking the person to explain certain details. Okay, tell me about this. You know, okay, they were worried
Yes.
he was just feeding a delusion and calling it
Right.
an alien contact.
Now,
Okay,
I do have more on that here in a little bit, because
Okay.
out of all of this that I'm telling you, we about to be poking some holes.
all right.
So stick with me, because that's not all on the investigation that I was able to uncover. But
Chad,
that's
get
what you
out
need
your
to know
pokey
for now.
thing. We're gonna have to poke some holes.
All I need is a pen in my brain. We got this.
Okay.
But the case in point is, in time, the Ariel School incident and John Mack's investigation, those two stories would become so closely intertwined. Now, in many ways, this is the sad, depressing part. In many ways, that is where the story of Ariel School incident comes to an end. No physical evidence was recovered from the field beyond the school grounds. No additional witnesses stepped forward claiming to have observed the event from outside the school. After the interviews had concluded and the investigators returned home, Ariel School resumed its daily routines. The teachers returned to teaching, parents returned to raising their families. Tim Leach continued his career as a journalist until his death in August of 2011. Cynthia Hind continued investigating reports of unidentified aerial phenomena throughout Africa, later documenting the Ariel School case in greater detail among her publications and written works. That was all until her death in 2000. And John Mack returned to the United States, where the Ariel School interviews became one part of his broader research into extraordinary human experiences before his untimely death in 2004 after being struck by a drunk driver. And for the students who were there, the story did not simply end. As years became decades, many of the students who spoke publicly about the incident continued to describe the same experience they believed they had on that September morning. Some participated in documentaries and interviews, and others largely avoided public attention. Many simply returned to their everyday lives, pursuing careers, raising families, and living far from the school where the event had taken place. Now, unlike many famous UFO cases, the Ariel School incident did not grow because of new discoveries or a steady stream of new evidence. Instead, it's endured because the original accounts remain part of the public conversation. The drawings, the interviews, and the testimony collected in those first few weeks after the incident continued to be revisited, debated, and re-examined by researchers, journalists, skeptics, believers, podcasters, and curious observers alike. And that's where the story begins to change. Over the years, the Ariel School incident had been revisited through a variety of documentaries and similar productions that had helped shape how the case is remembered and understood. Documentary films such as Ariel Phenomenon and The Phenomenon have brought renewed attention to the children's testimonies, often incorporating archival footage, interviews with former students, and commentary from researchers. More recently, the Netflix documentary series Encounters featured the Ariel School incident in its second episode, introducing the case to a new global audience through a modern serialized format. These retellings, however, are not neutral. Each documentary, each interview, and each presentation of the case reflects a particular perspective. What is chosen to be included, what is emphasized, and what is left out. Some focus heavily on the consistency of the children's accounts and the emotional weight of their testimony. Others highlight skepticism, alternative explanations, or the broader cultural context surrounding UFO sightings at the time. Now, if we're truly to investigate the Ariel School incident, it's not enough to simply revisit the story as it's been told, which you've just heard. We must also examine how it's been told. That means looking closely at the sources, the framing, and the omissions. Because what is not shown or discussed can be just as important as what is. So whenever the Ariel School incident is discussed, the conversation usually ends up with one or two places. Either the children witnessed an extraordinary encounter, or the entire event is dismissed as what was once called mass hysteria, a term now more commonly referred to as mass psychogenic illness or mass sociogenic illness. In simple terms, mass sociogenic illness describes situations where emotion, beliefs, or even physical symptoms spread through a closely connected group without an underlying physical cause. It's been documented in schools, workplaces, religious communities, and other groups where people influence one another.
The dancing plague.
One person reacts, others observe it, and before long, similar reactions begin appearing throughout the group. Yeah, I'm going to give you a nice, good clinical terminology here so we can, in my opinion, this is my opinion, dismiss this one. Similar actions begin appearing throughout the group. Importantly, this doesn't mean people are lying. The experiences and symptoms are genuine to those experiencing them. They're simply not caused by an underlying disease, toxin, they're simply not caused by an underlying disease, toxin, or other identifiable physical source. Because of that, investigators don't diagnose mass psychogenic illness with a blood test or a brain scan. Instead, they first rule out physical explanations and then examine how the event spread through the group itself. That's where the Ariel School case becomes more complicated. The children weren't reporting a mysterious illness. They weren't complaining of headaches, nausea, fainting, or breathing problems spreading from student to student. They were describing something they believed they had seen. That's why many researchers believe mass psychogenic illness may not be the most precise term for Ariel School. What skeptics are often referring to is something slightly different. The possibility that excitement, fear, suggestion, and conversation influenced how the children interpreted and later remembered what happened. That idea deserves consideration. 62 children were together on the playground. They could see one another reacting. As more children looked toward the field beyond the school grounds, attention naturally focused to the same location. Once classes resumed, they talked about what they believed they had witnessed. Those conversations continued over the weekend with parents, siblings, neighbors, and classmates. None of that means the children invented the story.
Right.
It does mean that once people began sharing memories, those memories can begin influencing one another. A child who originally noticed only bright lights may later hear another child describe a disc-shaped object. Someone who briefly saw a figure may later remember additional details about hearing classmates describing clothing or facial features. That isn't necessarily dishonesty. It's simply one of the ways human memory works. The more difficult question then isn't whether the children were sincere. It's whether sincerity alone guarantees that every detail was interpreted correctly. That question becomes even more interesting when we look at what had already been happening across southern Africa before September 16th. Just 2 nights earlier, on September 14th, thousands of people watched an extraordinary display cross the night sky. Bright fragments drifted overhead across several countries, prompting widespread reports of strange lights and unidentified objects. Today, most researchers believe those lights were the breakup of debris from a Russian Zenit 2 rocket re-entering Earth's atmosphere. At the time, however, very few people knew that. Radio stations invited callers to report what they had seen. Newspapers covered the event. Some people described meteors, others described fireballs. Still others believed they had witnessed UFOs. Cynthia Hind herself received numerous reports of unusual aerial phenomena from across the region. She documented the rocket event as Case 95. But that wasn't the only... I do too. But that wasn't the only report arriving at her desk. Around the same time, she recorded an account from a young boy and his mother who claimed to have witnessed something unusual during daylight, as well as another report from a truck driver who said he had encountered strange beings along a roadway at night. And 2 days later came Case 96, Ariel School. And together, these reports created what UFO researchers call a flap, a short period during which an unusual large number of sightings are reported within the same region. Now, whether that represents an actual increase in unusual activity or simply an increase in public awareness depends on who you ask. The rocket itself doesn't explain Ariel School. It can't account for children describing figures near the trees, eye contact, or what some believe was telepathic communication. What it may explain is something much simpler. By the morning of September 16th, conversations about unidentified objects were already circulating throughout Zimbabwe. When people spend several days talking about unusual things in the sky, those conversations naturally become part of the lens through which later events are interpreted. Psychologists call this priming, the idea that recent experiences influence how we understand the next unfamiliar thing we encounter. Several other explanations have also been proposed over the years. Some have suggested the children may have seen a dust devil carrying debris through the field. Others have pointed to traveling educational puppet shows that occasionally toured southern Africa, suggesting performers or equipment may have been mistaken for something extraordinary. More
That
recently,
blue? Anyway, go ahead.
but more recently, a former Ariel School student claimed the entire incident began when he pointed toward a shiny rock and jokingly told classmates, "Look, it's a UFO." Each explanation attempts to solve part of the problem or puzzle. Sorry, no problem. The difficulty is that none of them explains every part of the story. A dust devil doesn't easily account for the reported figures. A puppet show has never been placed at Ariel School that morning. A prank may explain how excitement spread, but it doesn't automatically explain the consistency of many later accounts or why the former student's recent explanation conflicts with statements that he himself made years earlier. The extraterrestrial explanation faces the same challenge. It must account for the lack of physical evidence, the difference between witnesses, and the questions surrounding how the investigation itself was conducted. And that may be the most important takeaway. Alternative explanations aren't meant to dismiss the Ariel School witnesses. They're meant to test the strength of the case. Every good investigation asks the same question: is there another explanation that fits the evidence? More than 30 years later, no proposed explanation fully accounts for everything the children reported, but neither does any single explanation stand beyond question. And that's why the next part of this investigation matters just as much as the incident itself, because before deciding what happened at Ariel School, we need to look carefully at how the evidence was gathered, preserved, and presented over the last 3 decades. So that is your proposed alternative explanations. That it's a dust devil, a traveling puppet show. That's got to be my favorite.
Yeah, because I mean, nobody would have like had that on the schedule or something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they're saying is that there was no reports of any traveling troupe or band or anything that now, could have.
The dust devil theory is interesting because out in West Texas, I've seen my share of those bad boys, and you get a nice stack of dirt that goes 800 or 900 feet up, and then you can't really see it anymore. But if those things were to grab a shed, it would rip it apart, and you would see shiny stuff way up high long before the dust devil's actual main body size would have been. So I could kind of see that making some aerial sense, but there's something.
But Chad, they would have been familiar with that and would have known what that was and would have been able to say this was this. They wouldn't, in my opinion, have mistaken that for it.
In one aspect, yeah, if they actually could see line of sight of the dirt part of it, but there's a 2/3 of it that goes up that you won't see anything but the airstream is still going up higher. And I've seen that stuff pick stuff up and scatter it out, and you'll see it sparkle in the sun. Even the sand itself falling back down can do that. But
that does not explain seeing the figures afterwards.
No, but I have a theory now. We'll talk about it.
I do have a question though. You said that they see this event, everybody is herded back inside, the school day continues, and then they go home for the weekend. No one goes out into this brush or and takes a look to see if there's any kind of charred ground, if there's any disrupted trees, if anything is squashed or broken. Nobody, and even after it's reported and everybody's talking about it and the investigator comes out, she doesn't venture into these trees. I mean, I get it, it's Africa, it's wild animals and everything, and yay, she wasn't going on safari. But number one, she did not go and look. And even that investigative journalist didn't go and look. That's his number one job, is to get the story.
I'm going to say with Tim Leach, I tried to find as much as I could with his involvement into this, and I found very, 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 very little. I think his assignment was go to the school, interview the children, be done. Nothing else.
Yeah, but wouldn't curiosity get you? Just say, hey, let's go get some B-roll of where they saw it?
Not necessarily, because remember, he is quoted as saying, I can handle war zones. This I cannot handle.
Like, maybe because there's nothing there to handle and he's got to tell a bullshit story.
But I will say through pictures, through stuff, yes, there are pictures of individuals in the field the next day, the day after, stuff like that, looking at any type of brush. But from the pictures themselves, like one of them tries to show a triangular shape, like possibly where a foot pad could have landed or something like that. And I'll be honest, I can't see it. I can't see exactly what they're talking about. And where I can see something that looks like a line, it looks like it could be potentially the tall grass that got mushed into the dirt and left a hard line there. So I mean, I was not able to find anything that definitively said teacher A or teacher B or investigator A, investigator B went out to the field and spent hours out into the field looking at all of this kind of stuff.
Well, because one of those children's pictures depicts the craft behind trees.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
So in a field is one thing, because you can clearly see at school that it has a large open field in front of it and around it. But that child drew the picture of it behind trees.
Behind trees, yeah. Now, mind you, again, remember that these figures were said to have been short, and these were basically thorn bushes. We would classify them as bushes here in America because we have tall-ass trees. I mean, some trees 30, 40 feet up type stuff.
So this is like scrub brush and stuff like that.
It's basically a kind of scrub brush, but to them it is trees. You know, that's the size of their trees there. So when you see pictures like this, I don't want anybody who's used to seeing like oak trees or pine trees that's not the height we're talking about here. I know it looks like these trees are towering over this craft, but this craft may be really small, and they may in fact not be towering over it by that much. And there are pictures of the field, although none that I really wanted to show because you can't really make out what the photograph is taking a picture of. Does that make sense? Other than from a faraway shot of a field across the playground. That's all that it is.
Yeah, so it clarifies nothing. Right. Yeah, it's not a picture that clarifies. Okay.
Right. Well, every investigation rises or falls on how the evidence is collected. That's true whether investigators are looking into a murder, an airplane crash, or a reported UFO encounter. If the goal is to understand what really happened, then the way witness testimony is gathered matters just as much as the testimony itself. Memory is not a video recording. It's something that shifts and reshapes over time. Every conversation, every interview, every news story, and every retelling has the potential to influence how an event is remembered. That's why investigators try to speak with witnesses as quickly as possible, keep them separated from one another, and ask open-ended questions before details have a chance to spread. And when you look at the Ariel School case through that lens, the picture becomes even more complicated. Now, Cynthia Hine moved quickly, arriving just 4 days after the incident. She interviewed the children and asked many of them to draw what they remembered. Now, without her work, much of the earliest documentation of this case wouldn't exist. But those interviews weren't conducted one-on-one. Instead, children were brought in small groups, typically 4 to 6 at a time, and other students were reportedly allowed to watch and listen. That environment changes things.
Yeah.
Once children begin hearing each other's accounts, it becomes difficult to separate what each child originally experienced from what they may have picked up through conversation. No one has to be lying for that to happen. A child who remembers bright lights might hear another describe a disc-shaped object. Someone else might mention a ramp or the appearance of a being. Over time, these details can begin to blend together, becoming part of a shared narrative that feels just as real as any individual memory. And by the time John Mack arrived, roughly 2.5 months later, that process had already been underway for weeks. The children had talked with classmates, parents, teachers, journalists, and investigators. They had drawn pictures, repeated their stories, and watched the event become something larger than their own individual experiences. Mack wasn't interviewing children whose memories existed only as they had on September 16th. He was speaking with children whose memories had already been revisited and reinforced over nearly 11 weeks. Again, that doesn't mean they weren't telling the truth.
Right.
It means their memories had been shaped by time and repetition like any memory would be. Mack also approached the case as a psychiatrist. His focus was on what the children believed they had experienced and how it affected them, not necessarily on preserving their earliest unaltered recollections. That distinction also matters because those are two very different goals. Then there's the question of scope. More than 200 children were present at Ariel School that morning. Around 60 reported seeing something unusual. But only 12 of those 62 witnesses were formally interviewed on camera. The version of this story that has circulated for decades, the interviews, the drawings, the clips shown in documentaries, comes but from a small fraction of the entire group. Now, those interviews are powerful and the drawings are striking, but they don't represent the full range of accounts from that day, including those who saw nothing at all. Now, taken together, none of this tells us whether the Ariel School incident was an extraterrestrial encounter. What it does tell us is that the investigation unfolded under conditions that would be considered far from ideal today. Witnesses were exposed to each other's stories early on. Significant time passed before one of the primary investigators arrived, and the evidence that entered the public record reflects only a portion of the available witnesses. None of that proves the children are wrong still, but it does mean that any conclusion, whether skeptical or extraordinary, has to be weighed against how the story itself was built. Because before deciding what happened at Ariel School, it's worth understanding how the version of events we know today came to take shape. That's probably the biggest issue I have, is how the interviews were conducted. Now, continuing with Mac, again, by the time he interviewed the children, that confidential review of his and his research methods at Harvard had already been underway for several, I think almost 6 months at that point. Much of that scrutiny stemmed from the work Mac had been conducting before he ever arrived in Zimbabwe. For years, Mac had interviewed individuals who believed they had experienced alien abductions. As part of that research, he sometimes used regressive hypnosis, more commonly called hypnotic regression, as a way of helping participants recover memories they believed they had forgotten or suppressed. Mac considered hypnosis to be a valuable tool for exploring extraordinary experiences, but not everyone agreed. Within psychology and memory research, hypnotic regression has long been controversial. While hypnosis has recognized therapeutic uses in certain clinical settings, many researchers caution against using it to recover memories. Studies have shown that hypnosis can increase a person's confidence in what they remember without necessarily increasing the accuracy of those memories. It can also make people more susceptible to suggestion, making it difficult to distinguish between an authentic recollection, an interpretation, or a memory influence during the interview itself. Mac also described his interviews for these extraordinary processes as, quote, co-creative intuitive process, emphasizing a collaborative relationship between interviewer and participant rather than maintaining strict investigative distance. To Mac, this approach helped him better understand the experiences being described. To many of his critics, however, it raised important questions about whether an investigator could unintentionally shape the very testimony they were trying to understand. Now, there is no evidence that Mac used hypnotic regression during his interviews with the Ariel School children, nor would such an approach have been appropriate in that setting. His conversations with the students were conducted without hypnosis, allowing them to describe their experience in their own words. Even so, the methods he had developed in his earlier research formed a part of the broader context in which his work was being evaluated. Again, it should be noted that the conclusion of Harvard's review came after Mac's time at Ariel School. When the review did conclude, the committee reportedly criticized aspects of these research methodology. The university, however, reaffirmed his academic freedom to continue pursuing his research and imposed no disciplinary action. So that is something these documentaries get wrong time and time and time again, is that he was being investigated for what he was researching. And that's why I'm very imperative about that getting out there right now, is that's not the case. The case is his influence, quote unquote, under his patients that are in this research program.
Right. That would be like if he was speaking to them and they said, I saw a figure. Oh, well, did you, was it green? Well, that's a suggestion you've just implanted to the person you're talking to. Yeah, they were green. Oh, well, what color green? They were bright green. Oh, okay. So were they little? Instead of saying what size were they, he says, were they little? Well, yeah, they were kind of little. You said he's subliminally feeding them the information that he expects to hear, which again, you should never do that. You should never ask any kind of leading questions. It should always be to tell me what you saw and do not suggest. Now, if they say green, you can say, do you recall the shade? Instead of saying, was it bright green? No, you say, do you recall the shade?
Yeah.
That way you're not influencing what their core memory is or what their definition is. So if he was asking leading questions because of what if he was pulling from his other interviews with other experiencers, he might have been trying to see by asking those questions. And I don't know, I wasn't in the room, but if you are leading, then you're basically contaminating your investigation.
Yeah. So it sounds like the investigation against him was definitely more of a research integrity investigation, not a quality, or not necessarily quality, but not a scope of his investigations,
Right.
or of what he was trying to research. It was,
But
are you applying strict standards to your practices? And that's one of the things we actually have to do in research. I remember doing my thesis. All of our documents that we had to do to gather information had to be approved by a committee to show that they weren't biased in nature, that they weren't influential, like that they were basically a neutralized question that you're not suggesting or inferencing, like all this stuff. So all of that stuff has to go through all these processes, and it sounds like maybe he cut some corners. So
yeah, well, I want it known that he was not flagged for any unethical violations or any ethics violations at all whatsoever. Right. It's just, this is the mindset that he's bringing into these interviews. And that's an issue when you're trying to do it as as a psychiatrist and not an investigator. Because again, like I said earlier, those are two very different goals. Psychiatry is trying to figure out how this affected you. Investigating is trying to preserve the evidence and testimony that we have. So this is something I do have an issue with, is that where he's at in his research with these extraordinary processes and trying to understand them more, he's doing great work. Don't get me wrong. But when he's bringing it as a psychiatrist and not an investigator. And
right. The psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Yeah. The psychiatrist comes in and says, "Oh, you saw the little green men. Did that scare you?"
Yeah.
Okay. Well, instead of saying, "Well, how did you feel when you saw them?" If you're saying, "Did that scare you?" Well, your brain wants to please the person you're talking to, and you're trying to read, what do they expect me to say? And especially as a child, children in general want to please the person in front of them.
Yeah.
And so if if the question was, "Did that scare you?" And he looks as if he expects them to say, "I was scared," then they were going to probably go, "Yeah, I was a little scared," but that isn't really what their initial feeling was with it. They might have been, "I was surprised. I didn't know what I saw." But yeah, if you're going at it from the psychology point, again, getting on with the feelings and this, if you ask it incorrectly, you're never going to get to the right answers.
Yeah.
What did the initial investigator that came out there, what was her name? What did
Cynthia Hind?
Yeah, what did she ever publish anything about this? Did she ever catalog anything?
She has published works in which the Ariel School is featured in. But to my knowledge, I did not uncover any single publication over the Ariel School case from Cynthia Hind. She does cite it as probably the most extraordinary case that she's ever investigated.
Which is weird, because if it's the most extraordinary case you've ever investigated, you'd think you'd have a piece of evidence or two. Like some photos, some measurements, some triangulation, some readings, some sensors, some night watch time. I mean,
the weather report from the day.
No, like, what do we do? Fall asleep in the grass and wake up and be like, "Well, that was a good investigation."
I will credit her with getting us some of the first visual documentation that we have of this case. I will give her that.
Yeah, but I mean,
but I do think that the rest was handled a little rough. We'll say that.
Even though even her eyewitness testimony is contaminated as far as being evidentiary, because we all know that. I used to work with kids a lot, and all it takes, and you're right, the excitement is very contagious among kids. It's even among adults. If you think about it, let's just put the three of us walking down a dark hallway. Someone thinks they see something, they jump. We all react. We all jump. Suddenly, we don't know what happened, but something just happened, even if we didn't see it or hear it, because Chad jumped and I jumped and Blake jumped. So something had to have happened to make Chad jump. So we're like, we're walking there and Chad just jumped. Now we're telling the story, even though we didn't see or hear anything. Right. So to have the children to sit together and tell what happened. And one kid goes, there were like all these lights. Yeah, and those lights were moving. They were moving. Oh yeah, those lights were moving. And then there was this big craft that came down. Yeah, there was a craft. It was silver. Everybody's adding something. And again, it's not. You're right. It's not a lie. It's the building of the story, which that is human nature. Our brain tries to put things together that don't make sense and make sense out of chaos. The bright lights were chaotic. What the child might have saw, they did see something silver that was in the trees that they tried to figure out what that was. And then by listening to their children, their brain created an acceptable story that they could understand.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the evidentiary thing was flawed.
Did MUFON ever do anything with this, or was it just, oh, somebody's over there, good job?
As far as I know, there's an investigator on the field is what they had.
So another one of those cases of we don't know how to do research notes.
Yeah. Well, by this point in the story, you've probably seen much of the same evidence as nearly everyone else has. If you watched a documentary about Ariel School, searched for the case online, or watched interviews on YouTube, you've almost certainly seen the same handful of children describing what they experienced. You probably recognize the same drawings, appearing from one production to the next. In many ways, those images and interviews have become the Ariel School case. But are they the Ariel School case, or are they simply the parts we've been allowed to see? That's a surprisingly difficult question to answer. Now, over the last 30 years, a relatively small number of interviews have shaped almost everything the public knows about this incident. The same clips are replayed, the same exchanges are quoted, and the same emotional moments are used to tell the story. They are powerful, they are memorable, and they are understandably compelling. They are also fragments of a much larger and longer conversation. The complete interviews, and believe me, I have searched come hell and high water, the complete interviews, any of them, have never become part of the public record in the way many people assume they have. Complete transcripts are difficult to obtain if they exist at all. Hours of recordings reportedly exist, yet most viewers will only ever have the opportunity to watch them most viewers will never have the opportunity to watch them from beginning to end without interruption, narration, or editing. Instead, we experience them through documentaries, books, and television programs that inevitably select the portions they believe are most meaningful to their own narrative. Right. The same question applies to the children's drawings. Many of the illustrations shown throughout the years have become instantly recognizable. The disc-shaped craft, the landing legs, the lowered ramp, the small dark figure standing nearby, those drawings deserve the attention they've received. They were created only days after the incident and represent some of the earliest visual records of what the children believed they had seen. But they were not the only drawings. I'm going to pause right here to pull this up onto the screen because I would like to share this screen here of what I was able to find called All Known Photos of the Ariel School UFO. And if you go to this website, here's a picture of the playground being up here. Map of the playground, playground being up top of the picture. This is the landing area down bottom right. So you can kind of get a sense of about how far apart that they are. Let me full screen this real quick so that everybody can see what I'm talking about. And then you scroll down through here. These are pictures of the field. The brush, like I said, can't really see hardly anything from it. But then you get to all these drawings. There's 73 drawings. This is probably the most comprehensive list that I think I've ever been able to find on this case of all of these drawings, and only a few of them are pictured in the actual public, I guess you could say, type stuff. No, go away. No, give me back to us. There we go. But anyways, I just want to know that whoever put that together, brava, because that is an amazing archive of some of the photos that I was able to see. So,
and even then, there weren't 72 in there, were there?
There are 73 photos of the UFO in that website. Now, obviously, I don't have enough time to show all 73 of them.
Right.
I will say that 75% of them are roughly the same, similar drawings. This shape object with a line of lights going around the bottom portion with a dome shape on top, typically hidden behind trees. Some do have landing pads, foot pads. Some have the ramp coming down, and most of them have at least one figure standing outside of it. Okay. So anyways, sorry, where was I? My bad. Oh yeah, I was going to stop there. Okay. Dozens of children reportedly put pencil to paper. Yeah, only a relatively small collection has circulated widely. What did the others look like? Did they reinforce the same descriptions? Did they differ in meaningful ways? Were some too inconsistent to publish? Were they simply never preserved? The truth is, for many of them, we don't know. There's another group whose voices are almost entirely absent from the public conversation. Again, roughly 200 children were at Ariel School that morning, and around 60 reported seeing something unusual. That leaves well over 100 students who either saw nothing at all or did not report any extraordinary experience. Their accounts rarely appear in documentaries or articles, yet from an investigative standpoint, they are every bit as important.
Yep.
Where were they standing? What drew their attention elsewhere? Did they look toward the field and see nothing, or did they never look in that direction to begin with? Those are questions that could help investigators better understand what happened that morning, yet they remain largely unexplored. And then there's the evidence everyone wishes existed, but doesn't. No verified photographs of the alleged craft. No radar data placing an unidentified object over the school. No physical traces that have been independently examined and confirmed. No recovered materials. No biological evidence. And when all of that is stripped away, what remains is the same foundation of the case, or of what the case has rested on since September of 1994. Eyewitness testimony. That isn't a weakness. Eyewitness testimony has solved crimes, reconstructed disasters, and changed history. But it also isn't infallible. It becomes strongest when it can be compared against complete records, independent witnesses, physical evidence, and transparent documentation. That's what makes Ariel School so unusual. The evidence we do have is compelling enough that people are still talking about it more than 3 decades later. The evidence we don't have makes it impossible to stop asking questions. Now, the Ariel School incident did not emerge as a single fixed story. It developed in stages, first among the children, then through the teachers, parents, journalists, and investigators. With each retelling, certain details became more prominent than others. One of the clearest examples is this idea of telepathic communication. Today, the environmental warning is often treated as a defining feature of the encounter. Children describe receiving those thoughts about pollution, environmental destruction, and humanity's dependence on technology. And this gives the event a larger purpose. But this theme is not as clear in the earliest accounts. Cynthia Hines' initial reporting focused on the objects, the figures, and the children's reactions. Critics note that the environmental message became more prominent in John Mack's later interviews. And even then, not every child described it. This does not mean the message was invented. Some children may have struggled to explain their impressions at first, but the timing matters, especially since full interview transcripts are not publicly available. We often hear the most striking statements, but not the full context of the interviews where no such message appeared. Over time, the environmental theme became central. It also aligned with Mack's existing interest in ecological and technological concerns. This overlap does not prove influence, but it highlights the importance of those complete records. Without them, it's difficult to know whether Mack uncovered, clarified, or unintentionally shaped the narrative. The portrayal of the children also evolved. A common claim is that they were isolated rural children with little exposure to UFOs or science fiction. I've heard this claim 100 times. This idea strengthens the case by suggesting their descriptions could not have come from popular culture. But this leaves out very big key contexts. Ariel School was a private school near Harare. Many students came from well-off families and had access to media, education, and urban life. While we cannot know each child's exposure, the claim that they were culturally isolated is difficult to support. The timing also adds another layer. Again, just 2 nights earlier, that rocket reentry had been widely seen across southern Africa, sparking that public discussion of unusual lights in the sky. Even without direct exposure to science fiction, the topic of unidentified objects was already circulating. And documentaries often simplify this background because the isolated child narrative is compelling. But the fuller picture is more complex, and the complexity matters. And that complexity increased in 2023 when former pupil Dahlin appeared in encounters. He claimed the event began when he pointed to a shiny rock and suggested it was a UFO, triggering a chain reaction among the other children. And this offers that simple explanation but raises new questions. Years earlier, Dahlin described seeing a flashing light in the sky, which conflicts with his later claim. His account also differs from other students who report objects and figures. His previous account, also differs from other students who reported objects and figures. This does not mean his later version is fake. Memories change and adults may reinterpret childhood experiences, but the contradiction itself deserves scrutiny. His appearance also highlights the power of documentary framing. If you've watched Encounters Episode 2, you'll know what I'm talking about. One production may present consistent witnesses, another may emphasize doubt or dissent. Both use real testimony, but neither tells the whole story. Every documentary involves choices, what to include, what to emphasize, how to present it. Those decisions shape how the audience understands the case. That does not make documentaries dishonest. It makes them narratives. Over time, the Ariel School has been shaped by those narratives. Certain interviews, drawings, and themes have been repeated while others have faded. The children have been portrayed in different ways, and conflicting accounts have been framed differently depending on the storyteller. The version most people know today is not just what happened in 1994, it is what has been selected, emphasized, and retold over the years. Well, more than 30 years after the events at Ariel School, we are still asking the same question. What happened that morning? For some, the answer is already settled. They believe the children witnessed an extraterrestrial encounter and nothing they've seen since has changed their minds. Others believe the entire incident can be explained through psychology, suggestion, misidentification, or the normal limitations of human memory. After examining the available evidence, one thing becomes clear. Neither side possesses every single piece of the puzzle. The Ariel School case has become one of the most famous stories in modern UFO history, not because new evidence continues to emerge, but because the same body of evidence has been interpreted in remarkably different ways for more than 3 decades. The children remain compelling. Their sincerity is difficult to ignore. At the same time, the investigation raises legitimate methodological questions. Important evidence remains inaccessible or incomplete, and several details commonly presented as established fact become far less certain when examined with their full historical context. None of those observations prove that extraterrestrials visited Ariel School. None of them prove they didn't. What they do demonstrate is something equally important. Extraordinary stories deserve extraordinary investigation. That means resisting the temptation to collect only the evidence that supports the conclusion we already want to reach. It means asking difficult questions of every witness, every investigator, every documentary, every skeptic, and every believer. It means acknowledging not only the evidence that supports a narrative, but also the evidence that complicates it. Because that's how investigation works. If we omit inconvenient details because they weaken our preferred explanation, we stop investigating and we begin advocating. Whether that advocacy is for extraterrestrial skepticism, psychology, or anything else doesn't really matter. The moment we stop presenting the whole picture, we've done a disservice to the story itself. The Ariel School incident deserves better than that. It deserves to be remembered not simply as a famous UFO case, but as a reminder that the search for truth is rarely as simple as choosing between belief and disbelief. Sometimes the most honest conclusion is also the most uncomfortable one. We do not yet have all the facts. Until we do, the most responsible thing we can do is continue asking questions, continuing examining the evidence, and continue following it wherever it leads. That is about every single freaking detail I could find on the Ariel School incident.
All right, Chad.
Lay it on me, Chad.
All right. So there's a couple of big things that just strike me as odd. One is the lack of like, hey, everybody back the hell up. Don't go over there because it could be dangerous kind of thing.
Right.
Like everybody's just like, let's go play with stuff. Yeah. The lack of exactly the lack of any processual, archiving of stuff either. It was like, oh, I'm gonna take some pictures of the field. Great. Why? Like you didn't make remarks on anything. There's no notes. There's like, it's amateur would be giving them too much credit here. Like literally that's how well the investigation of this was done. Like, yeah, I could give a 3-year-old a camera and get better results and better details out of this because they could draw me pictures. But there's a couple of big points that really screwed everything up. And one, I think everybody, you hear medical doctor from Harvard, yada, 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 like, bam, there's your real true researcher. And the problem with that is he had zero interest in the UFO. He was not there for the UFO. Yep. He could have gave 2 shits if there was a real UFO and aliens or not. He was interested in the human experience of the process. Yep. So he didn't care if they saw anything or not. He was more interested in how we were processing the data and how we were all doing a combined experience here.
Let me add right there. The one thing I did uncover in a couple of pieces in researching John Mack and his involvement with Ariel School is that at the time he was almost, as some say, on the hunt for cases outside of the United States as well.
So
I
he
will
already
imagine
had
there.
a conflict bias on this.
He
was
already had a
wanting
research
this.
bias. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous thing. It also comes back into the who's paying for his research and what results were they hoping for, because a lot of times, I hate to say this, everybody, you better really dig deep in any of your research, because typically the one who's paying for it gets the results they want.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it's very true.
Otherwise your research funding gets cut off.
It's very true.
Kind of got to remember those things. I mean, I've been a part of a few major research teams in my day, and it's an ethical gray line, truthfully. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. There's an ethical gray line there of pleasing the people that are paying for your salary to continue the research. And if you tell them, oh, by the way, we've hit a dead end, you just lost your job. Are you going to do that? Because that is a real conundrum and a very tough ethical position to be put in. So,
well, and we all know that you can always make the numbers match what you need them to say. You just have to pull the right data sets, right?
Yes, truthfully. And that's my biggest issue with statistics is if you change the formula enough times, you'll eventually get the results you want. I mean, anybody can do that. Just, let's use a different analytics approach. And
I think,
voila.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing about this case, because when I set out to research this case, I knew a little bit about it. I had been one of those that had seen the Encounters docuseries on Netflix and watched episode 2. And I remember being enthralled by this story whenever I was watching it. But when I started digging into it, I was like, where the hell are these interviews? Where is this? Where is that? Where is that? And then I started stumbling. I remember I came across one article that was from a skeptic's point of view. And I was like, ooh, I like these because they make me ask the tough questions. And so I was reading through it. And that's kind of where my eyes were opened up to the fact that we don't have access to the interviews. We don't have all the pictures. We don't have. And then it started talking about how this investigation unfolded and how the children were interviewed together. And I was like, oh, I'm about to change this whole script up right now. And I ripped up my old script of just telling the story. Because all in all, the story itself, as you heard tonight, is not very long. The story into how it was investigated is a hell of a lot longer than the story itself.
Yeah.
You know?
Honestly, the investigation is more intriguing than the story because it's a whole different phenomena of its own on how can so many things go wrong, but so much stuff still be the same. So it is interesting, but you said something that really caught my attention.
Okay.
That 2 days before this, we had a rocket reentry or some kind of satellite reentry that was physically seen all over the place. Now, if you want to see something cool, go look at a SpaceX launch when it blows up in atmosphere in suborbital. You can see that for thousands of miles. Like it's so high that the eye line to it, you can see it from everywhere. And so, but something interesting really, really happens here. So when you take an instance like that, especially in this just post Cold War era where, spy this, spy that's still going on. Russia's really kind of refining itself and is not necessarily the most trustful resource yet. And of course, that's all gone downhill since. But it would have been a mass go get that to find any of those remaining parts of something that fell from the sky like that. And now, if we known this had happened nearby this, there would have 100% been military-based crews looking for parts of this thing to make sure none of it survived or to try to gain access to the technology that was inside of it. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that these kids saw a military vehicle, guys in suits. Because, I mean, think about this. If you're in a radiation chute with the gas mask on because you don't know what's coming out of it, you're going to have these big old bug eyes and you're going to have stuff all over you. You're going to look pretty close to that damn description.
Very true.
And you might well be in a truck with lots of flashing lights with a drop down ramp to drag shit up onto it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that could have been that.
And I will say just to... Sorry,
I was going to say if they had let me say he's talking about the apparatus.
Yeah.
The thing you just said, if they had on a suit, but they're describing long dark hair. I guess they had some kind of filtration air pack on them that they could have seen something long and dark. I'm trying to kind of go in with your theory here that they could have been seeing
If they were trying to do this very incognito and get in and get out fast, they very well could have been partially ghillie suited to like camouflage themselves. Now you got to remember, this is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe itself is almost entirely a preserve, a wild animal preserve. So part of you, if you're going out to do any kind of recovery, it's get in, get out quick, because shit's going to try to eat us.
No, that's true. And to touch on what you were saying about being so high up in that rocket reentry and everything like that, reports were coming in from Zambia to Botswana. So
yeah, that's a long
when
way.
you're looking at a map, if you're unsure of the geography of where Zimbabwe is, it's basically you would have Zambia kind of northeast-ish of Zimbabwe, then Zimbabwe below that, and then you would have Botswana kind of southeast-ish. They make like a little backward C together, if you will. So the rocket reentry was coming from a country north of Zimbabwe to a country south of Zimbabwe. So, and also the other thing is like to say that these kids were not educated in pop culture and science fiction and all that stuff. We are 12 miles from Zimbabwe's largest city, which is their capital city. And I believe it has a population of don't get me lying.
It's big. It's not a small town.
Yeah, it's not a small town. Harare, Zimbabwe population, doing this live, 1.5 to 2.5 million people. So this is not, I mean, this is a city. This is a capital city with large. They are 12 miles from it. Granted, this is 1994. Now, that was, I believe, it was close to 1 million back in 1994, if I remember looking that up correctly, or 1.2 million. But we're still talking about a city that has a downtown with large buildings. With, I mean,
probably
this is urban
movie
life.
Theaters.
Yes, yeah. That's what I'm saying. To say that these kids are so far removed because it fits a narrative, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
They're 12 miles from a capital city with over 1 million people in it in 1994.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was an affluent school.
Yeah. So
private, cost money.
Yeah, they had access to, satellite TV and stuff like that. Don't kid yourself.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, what are your final thoughts on this case?
This one's really interesting because, I hate to discount it on its face value, but there's so much that was done wrong that I can't take any of it credible. Now, if somebody gotten out there with, measurement sticks and said like, hey, we saw this triangle in the dirt, sat down a measuring stick, took angled pictures on it, put light on it so you could see it cast through it, took any kind of readings there like, hey, something was here because look, we have some radioactivity that's going on, or we have some weird EMF spikes, or hey, look, we found chunks of something. Like there would have been physical, tangible evidence that was part of this. Like, and if it was my theory of like possibly, some people trying to collect whatever this was that fell from the sky, you should have seen tire tracks. You should have seen knocked down grassland. You should have seen people trespassing. Yeah. I mean, I don't see how these guys would have just been like, kid, go away. Like you saw nothing. So, I mean, I don't know. Had they come to it and been a little more, block it off, contain it, no one go in there, start the kids over there, I want to see them one by one, it would have had massive credibility increases. I think it's one of those unfortunate situations where they did everything wrong. Yeah. And even if this was the pinnacle close encounter of the third kind, they botched it so bad you have to toss it out. It sucks. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna slightly agree with you on some of this. For me, I say this. I stand by this with all experiencers and victims, is the fact that I will always believe your story because your experience is valid. Your experience is your perception, and your perception is your reality. In that same breath, I am allowed to say, as an investigator, that does not mean I have to negate my responsibilities of investigating claims that you are making. Of course, we're talking strictly paranormal here, because we can get into a whole rigmarole of that later on. But we're talking strictly paranormal here. I'm going to believe your story. So I will say that as for the children, I believe the experience that they had. I believe that they had this experience, but that doesn't mean that I have to toss out my questions or looking into and investigating this stuff. And the part that I will agree with you on, chat, is
this investigation was botched from the beginning because it doesn't meet a very strict, controlled environment investigation, because it's kind of all over the place. And on top of that, I think that the investigators that went in, agreeing with you again on the fact that they were more focused on the UFO than they were, and preserving the testimony, than they were about trying to get into the field, see what the field looked like. That, I mean, I can find hardly anything about an investigation into the landing site. So I'm going to have to say that I believe the kids had an experience. I wish I had more data to go off of. And I wish this investigation would not have been botched the way it was, because from the way that they are so compelling with their stories, and the truth, their truth has been told time and time and time again without missing a detail. I have to give a lot of credibility to that for 30 years worth of remembering every single detail.
Yeah. And I agree with that. It's like, but they missed the chance for one solid piece of evidence.
I agree.
Like, it could have been staring right at him, and they just were like, oh.
I think that this was an experience. I don't know about the greatest extraterrestrial visit on Earth. That's what it's been labeled. But I think this is definitely an unexplained experience that these children had. I just wish that the investigation would have been handled a hell of a lot better than it was. That's my final thoughts on it.
I think the greatest investigation in aliens has to include mashed potatoes somehow.
Shelley, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are a fascinating story. I have the questions, like you guys do, about why was there no investigation protocol followed? Why, whenever these children are telling these teachers something is in the trees over there, did not one of them just go and check? You know, just especially if they said, we saw people. Don't you need to go and check just purely for the security of your school?
Thank you.
So I would have to say that the fact that no one either listened or checked is where the true breakdown came in this investigation process. I do believe the children had something. They don't just talk about it to talk about it and they catch on like that, and have all of these children that tell a story. While not all the details are exact, there are similarities. Something else that hangs me up is that they said they saw beings that were telepathically communicating with them. That is fascinating to me. Could it be just a kid who has really good abilities? I don't know. Nobody asked how many saw that, how many had that electrifying experience. The ball was dropped every time it could be. In fact, it wasn't just dropped, it was kicked over the fence and nobody bothered to go and get it. So I'm going to say I believe that something happened. I believe that the children experienced something. I just wish that the adults, the charged investigators, the charged protectors, and the people that were charged with telling the story, investigating the story, had given it the weight, the depth, the time that it needed to be properly ferreted out, and to have given us an exact answer. So I don't think we'll ever know. Damn it. You just want to hit those people in the head, don't you?
I know.
And you know, Shelley, you brought up a great point with the teachers there, because I was a teacher once, and I'll tell you right now, if I ever had a student come back out from recess and said, hey, there were some people over in the trees,
you're going to go,
boom, that's a mat, and that's not even
issue.
A today standard. That's a any day standard. I'd have been up their ass like, why are you here? You need to leave. Like,
Yeah. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know? Because we ain't going to find out any more answers here.
Yeah, I know. Sounds good. We might be discussing quite a bit more on the post-broadcast, but no, you've heard our final thoughts on what we think it is. But bear with us. We'll get this wrapped up for you. If you want to support the show directly, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/EVP podcast. For just $5 a month, you'll unlock over 500 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast. So you do get an additional hour with us each week. Your support from this goes directly back to the show and towards the adventures that we get to bring you week after week. And if you are not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. And also make sure that while you're on our Patreon page, scroll down and see our recommended pages. We have the Old Park Hotel on there, a wonderfully haunted hotel in Ballinger, Texas, owned by Mr. Chad Wandell, Miss Leslie Wandell with Ghost Geeks. Go check that out. They have 24/7, 365 live cameras inside the hotel. I think you said you're up to 15, 14? Chat?
18.
18
He
now.
put in more last weekend. Yeah.
We went up to 18 now. 18 live feed cameras that you can watch anytime that you want to, as well as see some of the investigations that are taking place inside there. So make sure you stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal and looking for that green sound wave. Also, while you're at it, look for the haunted Old Park Hotel, as well as Ghost Geeks. Go and follow and like those pages as well for Mr. Wandale here. And remember, you can catch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our Eventbrite page to be notified when those public investigation tickets go on sale. We do have some investigations coming up at Broadhead Manor in September, and so those tickets are currently on sale. And all of these links, Jesus, sorry, I read an entire script tonight. All of these links will be added to our link tree, which will be on the Everything Vaguely Paranormal Facebook and X profiles Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, as well as in all of our show notes for you audio listeners. And we are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps the adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends. One of the easiest things you can do to help out our show and its rankings, wherever you get your audio from, head over there and download our catalog of episodes and leave us a review. If you have a story, comment, or question, or would like to be a guest on the show or have us as guests on your show, email us at theevppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up. Say hello. Let us know you were here.
Absolutely. Well, we want to thank y'all for joining us for another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. For myself, I am Blake Smith. My partners tonight in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Chad Wandell. We thank y'all for tuning in. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.